Hi, good evening and welcome everybody. I'm Lisa Sawsville. I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Coverts. And for 40 years, Vermont Coverts has been dedicated to empowering landowners and others with the knowledge, tools, and community support to manage their woodlands to enhance wildlife habitat. Through community support, manage the woodlands to enhance wildlife habitat, through our hands-on training. See, that's what happens when I try and read. Through our hands-on training, like our Coverts Cooperator training, through educational workshops like this one, and our peer-to-peer outreach, we help ensure forests and wildlife habitats remain healthy and resilient. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. If you enjoy our program and would like to support our mission, please consider making a donation. You can go online to our website, www.vtcoverts.org, and we have an exciting match opportunity for new donors. Each donation, regardless of the size, will be matched with a $50 gift up to $2,500. This increases your impact and our work to support our mission. We also can unlock an additional $7,000 if we meet our overall fundraising goal by the end of the year. So your donation kind of has a double impact. So just consider that. And before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items. Please mute yourselves to minimize any background noise. Feel free to keep your cameras off or on. That's entirely up to you, whatever you're comfortable with. We encourage questions, or if you want to share books, please type them in the chat at any time. And finally, we are a community and we love to build that community. So let us know who you are in the chat, where you're from, and something that you're really excited about coming up for the new year in your woods. And I'd like to welcome tonight our conservation leaders, some of our conservation leaders here in Vermont. We have with us Julie Moore, who's the Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources. And from UVM, we have Dr. Tony D'Amato, who's the Director of the Forestry Program, and Dr. Allan Strong, who's the Director of Wildlife and Fisheries Program. They're each going to take turns sharing their favorite books and discussing whatever comes up, sort of like a little mini book group. So sit back and enjoy. Maybe you'll find something to add to your wish list. And we're going to kick it off with Julie. So Julie, if you are ready to share your first book, let's have it.
My first book is An Immense World. That's not very focused. Sorry, everybody, by Ed Yong. I don't know how many folks have had a chance to read it, but it is an incredible dive into how animals perceive the world and comparing and contrasting it to how we would think animals perceive the world. Everything from the range of colors to the sense of smell to hearing and sight. It is really incredible. And one of my favorite sets of facts in the book was around a specific kind of shrimp with eyeballs that can see different things out of the tops and bottom halves of their eyes, and in fact can clap their fins together hard enough to create cavitation that actually stuns the plankton that they want to eat. And to me, it was just this complete reset of what I thought I knew about the animal world, and can't recommend this book enough.
Great. Has anybody else read that, Allan or Tony?
No, I haven't.
Allan's muted. He's trying to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, looks like Eric in the chat has read it.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Eric. That's great.
Oh.
All right.
And Anna. Yeah.
Thank you, Julie. All right. Allan, how about you kick us off with your book?
Well, I'll start out with a.
Oh.
Just kidding, really. But if you're really into psycho identification of gulls, The Gull Guide is an amazing book. But I don't think it's really great reading for most folks. So I read this book. We had at UVM, Ada Limon came and talked about her latest book called Startlement. It was kind of and she's really engaging in terms of reading her own poetry. And this book is both kind of an anthology of poems from her earlier works, as well as the new poems called Startlement. And I thought it was kind of cool. She actually thought maybe startlement would be a term that she could coin, which means a collection of poems. I think she was trying to think about like a murmuration of starlings and saying, what's a collection of poems? How about a startlement? So, but it's really interesting because you can actually kind of watch her evolution really as a poet, because she's got selected works and they're in chronological order. So it's really fun to read. And she writes a lot of what she writes is it's got a pretty deep emotional piece to it, but she writes a lot of poems about natural history and some really interesting ones. And I guess if I have a minute, I thought I would read one that maybe would be one that Tony would enjoy. And this is called Instructions on Not Giving Up. And I've got to put some light on here because I was trying to get my holiday lights in the background to show up, and now my lighting's a mess. So, wow, I look like a ghost. This is awesome. All right. Instructions on Not Giving Up. More than the fuchsia funnels breaking out of the crabapple tree, more than the neighbor's almost obscene display of cherry limbs shoving their cotton candy colored blossoms to the slate sky of spring rains, it's the greening of the trees that really gets to me. When all the shock of white and taffy, the world's baubles and trinkets leave the pavement strewn with a confetti of aftermath, the leaves come. Patient, plodding, a green skin growing over whatever winter did to us, a return to the strange idea of continuous living despite the mess of us, the hurt, the empty. Fine then, I'll take it. The tree seems to say, a new slick leaf unfurling like a fist to an open palm. I'll take it all. And, I don't know. I for a while I was really into writing bad poetry. And so it's great to read someone who is very skilled at writing poems. And I think the other piece of it is probably you all know is just poetry leaves, it's almost like it's like a two-person exchange. There's just so much more that you can take away from a poem that maybe the writer didn't intend. There's just seems like there's a lot of hidden meaning in all of these poems. So I really enjoyed reading that book. And if you have a chance to, watch her on YouTube or see her in person, she's really engaging in terms of her reading of her own poems.
That was really interesting. I really thank you for reading a poem. That was great. Having little pieces of books is really nice. And I had not heard of that one at all. And I have to add that to my list.
Yeah, I think it's just the 24th poet laureate of the U.S. So, and I think it was primary. I think she was in the Obama administration, as I recall. Yeah, but yeah, it's great stuff.
I will also point out I am interested in the Goal Guide.
Yeah.
When I first learned, when at the point there, when you're little, it's a seagull, right? Everything,
exactly.
It's goals, and all right. So we had this goal and that goal that I knew when we were here. Across the country after I had been in college, and we went to Alaska, and it's the first time, and I'm like, that goal doesn't look right, and I can't find it in my Eastern guide, for Peterson's. So I had to buy the National Geographic's guide to birds of the North America. And I'm like, oh, it's a mew gull. And I was so excited. Like there was these, like, that's actually my favorite gull because it's really compact and cute. But anyway.
Well, I hate to tell you now they have split it and changed the name. So now if you have been to Europe, you actually have two birds on your life list. You have the short-billed gull from North America and the common gull from Europe.
Oh, I did not know. When was that?
That's just been in the last couple of years.
Oh, good. I don't feel so bad.
Yeah.
All right, the splitters and lumpers. I mean, oh my goodness. Well, that's great. I have I have an extra life bird. Yay me. Alrighty, should we move on? Tony, what do you got for us for your first book?
All right, I'll put it in the chat. And the book has a beautiful cover, but I did realize when I went to grab it, I had my copy lent out. So this is one I got from the library, which there's no cover on, but it's Tending the Wild by Kat Anderson. It's a book that was written in the early 2000s and really focuses on the native tribes of California and their relationship with the land and how they really have been significant stewards of that landscape for millennia. And so it's interesting when you're talking about what books inspired us, like many that get into this, like John Muir and his writings were a big part of, how I got into what I do. And the premise of this book is very much to push on the myth that Muir really put forth of this untrammeled wilderness of California. And the reason I love this book is that it really gets into our relationship with the land and looks at it through the lens of reciprocity and many of the themes that those of you that read Robin Wall Kimmerer's books have become familiar with, but very much across an entire state and across many different cultures within California, and how indigenous communities really have been active stewards in that landscape, and in particular, kind of looking at how early anthropologists had ascribed the general characteristics of many of the California tribes as hunter-gatherer, because they didn't encounter like large agricultural fields like you might have seen in Cahokia and some of the larger known indigenous communities in the Midwest. And what they overlooked was the very peaceful and reciprocal relationship that was happening in the forest and the prairies and other places where there was definitely much tending happening, much interaction going on. And so the book just gets into a lot of detail about like coppicing and picking plants in ways that renew them and making sure that you use fire as a tool to produce fresh shoots for weaving baskets. And really is kind of a nice, I think, introduction to just how indigenous stewardship models interacted with the landscape that sadly were lacking for much of our region. But for me, I gain a lot of inspiration from reading this book in that context. And it's loaded with just great quotes that I just view as really nice things to reflect upon, either from Kit Anderson herself or from tribal elders and knowledge holders. And so a quote that I use a lot when I talk to my students about kind of like forest stewardship is she uses this quote that says, "To both use and conserve nature requires complex knowledge and practices, far more complex than leaving nature alone." And really what she gets at throughout the book, and I think is certainly discussions we have today, is this idea of wilderness being a bit of a fallacy, particularly in the context of in these landscapes that were first being described by Europeans and kind of our relationship with them. And so I'm very indebted to Kathleen Stutzman, who is a student of mine that recommended this book and really opened my eyes to a whole different way of looking at the forest and that relationship. So even though it's California, there's a lot in that I think resonates with how either individual landowners or foresters or others might think about kind of connecting to the woods. So it's a great book.
That's awesome. Thank you, Tony. I'm really excited because I want you to know none of those books have ever come up in our other previous programs each year. So I love that we've got these new books that we can all kind of delve into, and hearing the way you talk about them really makes it come alive for me anyway. So I want to thank you for that. We're actually reading, the Coverts book group is going to be reading The Serviceberry by Robin Wall Kimmerer. So, sort of have some of that indigenous knowledge and the reciprocity that people are talking about. And it really does, when you walk in the woods and you think in some of those terms, it sort of changes, at least it changes for me, how I feel when I'm walking through the woods. So that's pretty cool. Thank you for sharing that one. Any thoughts or comments from Julie or Allan on any of your other books? I mean, not the ones you haven't discussed yet, these first three.
I haven't read either of those, so I've jotted them down myself. I'm looking forward to it.
That's great. All right, Julie, what's book 2?
All right, I picked a real old one for book 2, which is Natural Acts. God, my camera's terrible. Sorry, everybody. Which is a compilation of David Quammen's columns from Outside Magazine. I just looked. This one was published in 1985. So these are dated, but they are super interesting. And I actually picked out I picked this this edition of his books of essays because it contains my favorite one, which is called The Tree People. And this is a story he tells about his dad specifically, but then also in general about people having special relationships with trees. And the context of it is he goes out one morning and his dad is outside with a stepladder and a blow dryer trying to melt ice off a magnolia tree in Ohio. And sort of, the idea that a magnolia tree has no right to be growing in Ohio for the types of reasons he observes. And he goes on and tells the story, but the end of it is just, to me, one of my favorite passages, which I thought I could read. So he says, was the magnolia tree by disposition a complacent creature, or was it, as I hope, sensitive? Did it appreciate during the year of growth following that 1963 ice storm what that man with the stepladder and the raw hands had done for it? The house and the half acre have long since been sold to strangers. The magnolia, last time I drove past, looked neglected, a broken crown, whole branches on which leaves were a sickly brown. Too bad. It may not survive another big ice storm and certainly will not live to see 4,000. But does there perhaps remain in its heartwood some record, just a slight thickening of one annual ring, like a grateful sigh of that mildly eccentric act of love? Can a magnolia remember a man? And I really like that mildly eccentric act of love that we show for nature. And just this story has stayed with me for a very long time.
That's great. Thanks. Who's the author of that one, Julie?
David Quammen. Oh, I wrote it and then didn't hit send to put it into the chat. But he writes, so he used to write for Outside Magazine. He writes occasionally a column that appears in National Geographic. He has a couple of longer books. One called The Tangled Tree that is really dense if you're not a biology person by training, which I'm not. So, but I find his stories to be this incredible mix of like hard science and humor that is really an enjoyable read.
Yeah, I think is it Song of the Dodo is his as well on Island Biogeography. Really awesome book too. Yeah.
Yeah. And Monsters of God, which is one about like apex predators essentially and carnivores. They're all fabulous reads.
I don't know any of these. This is exciting. I got a big book list. My list, it just gets longer and longer and longer.
Mine too.
Oh, Ellen, what's number 2 for you?
Well, hopefully this hasn't come up yet for your group, called The Backyard Bird Chronicles by Amy Tan. And it's a really fascinating book. I guess it's sort of a, just kind of a quick summary of what it's about. Amy Tan, who author of the Joy Luck Club, got into first nature drawing and then became a totally obsessed backyard bird feeder, and just spending thousands of dollars on suet and mealworms and all kinds of different seeds, making crazy contraptions to keep the squirrels out of different feeders and that sort of thing. But the thing that's really interesting, there's an older book that I read really before I started my field work for my PhD, called On Watching Birds by Lawrence Killam. And he was a kind of a scientist by training, but had found that just by going out and looking at birds and watching them carefully, there was just a lot of natural history observations that you could make that actually no one had ever seen before. And it's really interesting because Amy Tan sort of does the same thing, but in her backyard. And she's very upfront about acknowledging the fact that she's created a very artificial environment. So this is not something, she talks about the Amy buffet and the fact that no bird goes hungry at Amy's house. But has some really fascinating natural history observations. And I think the fact that, and I'll try to show a few of these, the fact that she has really tried to do this in a way, understanding birds through art, I mean, she has really some fantastic drawings. Some of them are sort of portrait-like, but at the same time, she just does, these kind of quick field sketches about, birds around her feeder. And, you know, despite the fact that I am, an ornithologist by training, it was just fascinating to see the kind of questions that she tries to answer while she's watching birds in her backyard. And a lot of them are ones that ornithologists really don't have, I wouldn't say any answers to, but certainly don't have conclusive answers to. And so just kind of watching her thought process as she's watching these birds in her backyard and thinking about behaviors and trying to understand what are they doing, dominance hierarchies and learning songs and young birds and older birds, really, really interesting. And it just is it's a great book in terms of just sparking your curiosity about birds. It's really fascinating. And, I think for, even for me who reads it as an ornithologist, I'm like, wow, that's really astute what she's seeing here. And I think part of it is the fact that she's really, taken to drawing and really trying to observe these birds very carefully. So I would highly recommend it, depending upon, regardless of how much you know about birds. It's really very entertaining, a lot of humor in there, and the drawings are really fun to look at.
That's great. I want to share that. She's on social media, of course, and so it popped up on mine the other day, and I'm like, oh, because it's on, that one's actually on my list. And
Yeah.
she wrote, I had not planned on doing the Christmas bird count in Central Park, but then I saw the forecast for Sunday. Snow, lots of it. I'm a romantic. I pictured it. The bare arms of trees adorned with sleeves of snow and bejeweled with birds. Lacy trees in their stark black trunks, snow crunching under freezing feet, chapped lips, numb hands, a drippy nose, great company, endless smiles, the surprise and magnificence of a special place magically transformed. A search for birds often leads to spectacular encounters with nature that would have otherwise been myths had I chosen to sleep in. So I think her book it will be worth reading.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you read Kingbird Highway?
I have read Kingbird Highway. I love Kingbird Highway.
I do too. I had been in college, and you don't read much in college unless you have to, right? You're busy, and then I'd gotten out and I was busy doing other things. I'm like, I need to read a book. And I was like out of sorts, and I found that one, and I was like, it like kind of got me back into reading. And I thought that was a great book.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know that book, you may be familiar with The Big Ear. So a book by that name, but then the movie, which was awesome too, for bird nerds. Three people trying to see as many birds as they can in North America in a single year, and sort of the exploits and all the things that they tried to do to see as many species as possible. Ken Kaufman essentially did it on a budget of like $1,000 or something like that. I mean, just hitchhiking across the country. I mean, he has this story about looking for rare seabirds off the California coast. He's on a jetty and he gets blown into the ocean and just climbs back up, sets his scope back up, and keeps looking for birds. Like, man, this guy's a madman. But yeah, it is a great read. I mean, his diet leaves something to be desired. I won't talk about that here, but yeah, it's a really good book.
That's definitely fun. And I will say too, with Amy Tan and feeders here in Vermont, remember your feeders need to go out after the snow is on the ground. They say like about 3 inches, so our bears are denned up, and then take them in early here in the valley. We're in the Champlain Valley, April 1st. It's got to come in, and so just beware of that for my Vermont people. We got to coexist with our bears, and we got to keep them out of our feeders. So just make that plug here.
Well, yeah, one other thing I'll mention that she was really adamant about is whenever she saw a bird that she thought might be diseased, she literally took all her feeders in, disinfected them, and did not feed birds for like a month or two. So she was really into sort of the ethics of bird feeding, but obviously had no bears where she was in California.
Right. Well, thank you for those. Tony, you're up.
Yeah, the web blanket of on this excitement around birds. I'm going to go into what I really enjoy, which is history and forest history, and a book that was recommended to me about 7 years ago. We were working on a project that I was fortunate to be included with Jerry Franklin on, and he really suggested this book called Plantations and Protected Areas. I recommend it occasionally in presentations by Brett Bennett. Oops, I almost lost the chat. Get in there for you. And the reason I like it is twofold, just from like a purely, if you like history of forests, which maybe there's a sample size of one here, that I think those of us that go through and learn about the history of forest stewardship definitely don't hear about what Kat Anderson discusses in her book. But also really it's very much through the lens of European forest stewardship and kind of how that really then influenced American forestry. And so this book is written by an Australian, and it really looks at kind of like the change in global forest stewardship that's occurred, and very much so from a kind of broad perspective. Still, I think doesn't do justice to the indigenous perspective, but at least includes other countries that were trying to formalize forest science. But the underlying thesis of the book really is that like we've kind of moved into this bifurcation of the global forest estate, basically, that we rely on plantations for our wood, and then those developed countries that have the assets to do so then protect areas locally and then rely on wood elsewhere. And it really talks about just how forestry as a practice, shifted into this industrial model broadly, and really got efficient at it almost to a fault, and lost that connection to the forest. And then at the same token, those of us that use forests lost that connection because we could produce the wood elsewhere. And so it's a really nice, not nice, it's a frustrating book, but I think a good book. It was written in 2015, could have been written today, relative to some of the discussions and debates we even have in our own region. But I really found it, is a powerful model to think through. And I think to me, and I was talking to Liz this morning about this, it's about kind of losing that relationship with the woods, that really the only way we interact with them is either to extract or to protect, but not to actually steward and interact with in a respectful way. And so if we had used maybe the tending the wild model, and thought about that as the way that we interact with the forest, maybe we wouldn't be at this divergence that we currently are today. And so it's a very quick read. If you like history, it's a fast read. And so I was excited because I don't always have time to read like long books. And so when I got it and started reading it, I really found it fascinating and interesting, and very different perspectives on both the history, but also where we're at today, as we try to think through like best use of the forest. So if you're interested in that topic, which is very, very much in our backyard these days, it'd be worth taking a look at as a way to think through like how we got to where we're at and where we might go with that dynamic.
Does the author talk about sort of the genesis of how the split sort of, or how the crack opened up, so to speak?
Yeah, they definitely, globalization was a big part of aspects of it where, and really speak to those nations, or I would say states or counties that can afford to get their wood from elsewhere, do so. And at the same token, really, the advent of emphasizing, wilderness and wildlands, which is a very important thing, but almost kind of losing the ability to have like that more integrated model of stewardship. It really talks about this conservation model that was abandoned. I'd argue that some of the conservation model they talk about still was kind of like the old multiple use sustained yield. It wasn't like there was a lot of ecological silviculture stewardship happening in that model, but it's at least there was a range of interactions with the forest, not just either like farming fiber or protection. And I think it also just gets into, we get obsessed with the efficiency, and also I think in some cases put too much autonomy on the shoulders of the forester to make the decision, and versus kind of broader engagement with the communities, and in some cases either backfired or led to a pretty singular like wood focused solution in some areas that then just got adopted as the model. So lot of fingers pointed in there, but I think a mix of just the change in the global trade and also inequities and resource use across the globe. So, but and they kind of, I mean, they point to, when the book was written, it's like 35% of our wood globally came from plantations, and now we're kind of at about 50%. So we kind of are there a bit in some regards.
The whole idea of the history, of our forests and what our forests, we always talk in the Coverts training for those that have been through the training, how we were forested and then we were cleared because the sheep came and we had cows and then everything's abandoned and now we have second growth and don't have a lot of early successional, don't have a lot of, old growth. And the whole idea, and for me, reading these books, I had never come across shifting baseline syndrome till I had read Eager. It's not something I was familiar with. And so that opened up a whole new concept for me that, okay, what's the baseline? My baseline is different. Like I even think about when we were in Virginia and they had the plantations, the pine plantations there, and the people who grow up there around those, that's what they think a forest is. They haven't been elsewhere. So we all have these different views, and trying to understand what was, what is, what should or could or can be is really interesting. So I'm excited about a history book, Tony. Thank you.
Yep. No, you might not be thanking me when you dig into it, but no, it's short at least, and it's a good book.
Eat your broccoli.
Yeah, exactly.
Stand behind your choice, Tony.
I stand behind it. I get no royalties, and I've suggested this book to many people. So, yeah.
All right, Julie, you're
All
up.
right. Number 3 is, God, I wish I could figure out how to make this not blurry. It's called Entangled Life, and it's the author, as you might think the author of a book about fungus would be named, is Merlin Sheldrake. But I found it fascinating that somebody could write 300 plus pages about fungus and make it like there are laugh out loud moments. I am a big factoids person, and this book is just full of factoids about fungus and mycorrhizae and sort of the evolution of plants and plant material. I thought I might read a little excerpt from it, but it is an enjoyable read, and I think the guy's also a little weird. So I just want to qualify an asterisk by this, which is there may be parts you want to flip through, but on the whole, it's worth some of your time. But just for example, if we could pause decomposition starting now, the planet would pile up kilometers deep in bodies. We would think of it as a crisis, but from a fungal point of view, it would be an enormous heap of opportunities. And there's just like little gems like that sprinkled throughout. And then the other one I had flagged to share was just a bit about the Carboniferous period. 290 to 360 million years ago, the earliest wood-producing plants spread across the tropics. From a plant perspective, wood was and remains a brilliant structural innovation. And that may have spoken to me because I'm a civil engineer by training. But then he goes on, as plant life boomed, the jostle for light intensified and plants grew taller to reach it. The taller they became, the greater their need for structural support. Wood was plants' answers to this problem. Today, the wood of some 3 trillion trees, more than 15 billion of which are cut down every year, accounts for about 60% of the total mass of every living organism on Earth, and some 300 gigatons of carbon. And just the magnitude of what's being described there to me was staggering. As I say, I love nothing more than a good factoid, and I think this book is just chock-a-block full of them. And I do appreciate the comment in the chat that maybe all mycologists are a little weird.
We read that one with the Coverts book group and discussed it. And yeah, there were quite a few interesting conversations from some of the things that he put in there. You all who are on here from the book group should put some of your thoughts in about that book in the chat box.
I bring little factoids to dinner to the point where my family was like, enough.
Yeah, it wasn't it. I was reading it. I was working and I would just share like, oh wait, you gotta hear this. It was
Exactly.
it definitely had those things you wanted to share with other people for
Yeah.
sure. Alan, Tony, have either of you read that one yet?
No, I have not.
It was interesting. I read it after, the first sort of mycorrhizae information sort of came out, right, a couple years ago, and we had someone come talk about it. I came to a talk at UVM about it, and we read Finding the Mother Tree with the book group, and so we read those in the same year. And I'm like, because this whole talking thing and the anthropomorphism kind of doesn't, I don't really pull into that, but these were more kind of like you said, it was more scientific with a little bit of humor in with it,
Yeah.
and how it works. So that we did enjoy that aspect of it.
If you are up for it, I would read another poem that kind of speaks to the quote that you just read, Julie. I think this is again from Ada Mone's book, and I'll try to do it with the red light so I'm not so washed out here. If I can read it. Oof, maybe not. What is there to be done now but enter against the abandonment, become a hollow sound, in the halo of labyrinth green, to become a crossed out word on the back of someone's hand. Once all of this became all of this. One not yet golden western larch, curved by a white pine curves by a western hemlock. No one here is heroic. To enter here is to enter magnitude, to feed an ecstatic somethingness, a nothingness of your own name. All words become wrong. A whole world exists without us. But who is us? Lichen, moss, grizzly scat, moose hoofprint, like two exclamation points by the drying frog pound. How do you know you're alive? What evidence will you leave? So many myths are unraveling. A yellow swallowtail glides by over the sinless creek bed. Oops. A storm wets the skin, and we're surprised to have skin. Woods rose, white flowered rhododendron. Nothing here is unfinished. What it gave me, I saw a strange tree emerge out of a ground made of ancient trees, on top of more ancient trees, on top of more ancient trees, on top of more ancient trees, and understood then that this is how the earth was made.
I really like that.
Seemed like it worked.
It does, yeah.
A common theme.
Yeah.
All right, Alan, do you have a third book to share?
I do have a third book to share. Again, I don't know if you've done this one or not. It's from Tony and my colleague, Trisha O'Kane, Birding to Change the World, sticking with the birding theme, although this one's a little bit different. For those of you who don't know Trish, she has a really kind of a fascinating history. She started out as a journalist covering some really horrific issues in Central America, and then moved back to the States, worked at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and then got a job teaching journalism at Loyola University. Literally moved to New Orleans about I don't know, weeks before Katrina hit, and her home was totally destroyed. And she kind of became a hurricane evacuee for a semester, and then Loyola opened up again in January, and she basically started teaching journalism to students and with colleagues who all had PTSD around Katrina. And I mean, just a really life-altering experience. And she decided to change careers, went to get her PhD at University of Wisconsin-Madison. And that was where she started essentially the course that we now teach at UVM, or Trish teaches at UVM, called Birding to Change the World. And a lot of her background is in social justice. So it's not just really about teaching about the natural world, but it's teaching about access to natural areas. It's teaching about, sort of who and how you are in nature and who gets to explore it. And the idea behind the course is really interesting. So the UVM students are paired with students at Flynn Elementary School, and essentially they serve as mentors to these young kids. The kids at the elementary school are basically describe it as, we get a college student for a semester. So they're just ours. And Trish actually tries to flip that role of mentor and mentee, where the students at Flynn actually give her students homework to do. They ask them bird questions and nature questions, and they essentially have to do those as homework. So it really tries to flip the power dynamics. But it's a really great book. It's funny to read it, given how well I know Trish. I mean, we do a lot of birding together, so it feels to me, because I know her so well, it feels, I don't know, somewhat voyeuristic to some degree. Like, Trish, I know so much about you, and I mean, even though you know me well, if you read my life history, you might think very differently of me. But it's got a lot of great natural history information in there. It's got a lot of grappling with challenging topics around the intersection between social justice and environmental protection. And it also has just some great kind of like life lessons about, sort of being a kid in nature, and the things that I think we sort of weed ourselves out of as we go on. This one really funny aspect of the book where the kids decide that the rite of passage to be in the bird club is to roll down this hill they call the sled hill, and any guests, any journalists that come out, any other teachers, all have to roll down this sled hill to be admitted into the group. So it's really fun to see how kids think about belonging in that situation. So it's a really great book, and I mean, I think the stuff Trish does is amazing, and really thinks about how do you form community, and how do you get how do you teach kids about nature in a way that doesn't turn them off and think they've got to be lab scientists from a young age.
So my question to you is, did you roll down the hill?
This was actually, I've gone out with Trish a few times, and it is chaos, controlled chaos, but it's a lot of fun. The hill was when she was at Madison, so I did not experience the sled hill, but I have been dragged by the hand by young kids to flip over logs and look for salamanders and all that sort of stuff. It's a lot of fun.
That's great. I love the idea of, building community, because that's what we try and do with Coverts is it's peer to peer. We want them to talk to each other, ask questions, reach out, meet people in their community and share with others. And I know those kids are sharing with their parents and with their siblings, the exciting things that they're finding. So I think that that's really telling of what, we kind of need to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it really, I think it really sparks enthusiasm in a very different way than like me as a faculty member imparts to my undergraduate students when it is peer-to-peer, or as she kind of flips those power dynamics. The kids in the elementary school really think, hey, we can be the teachers here, which is great.
It's white letters.
That's really good. All right, Tony, you want to give your third?
Yeah, so my third is a guide to goals type recommendation, because yeah, you wanted just to possibly think about what inspired us. And so I'm not a bird nerd. I'm, I guess, a forest freak or whatever. I don't know what you call us that obsess about that. But the third book is a good
Part of a Zoom.
somebody's on a good resource. It's more of an academic book, but it's a book called Natural Woodland, by George Peterkin. Peterkin's I can put it in the chat. He's a British forest ecologist, and I worked at the library when I was an undergrad student at Maine, and I still remember like being in the SD section, which is the forestry section in the Library of Congress catalog, and seeing this book and starting to flip through it. And yeah, as Liz said, it really just was what I needed at that point in my life. I in terms of connecting with something that really spoke to me as it relates to old growth forests and understanding those forests and what that means for conservation. And what's, I think, neat about the book of being written by a British ecologist who's, spent their career in a landscape where, you might have a, tree that's been coppiced for 500 years. So it's old, but, that might be, what you have. There's very little of what we'd consider, old growth in that landscape. And so it's really primarily focused on North America, includes the Pisgah Forest in New Hampshire. So he does a lot talking about the history of that tract, as well as Joyce Kilmer in the Smokies, certainly the Olympic Peninsula, as well as old growth forests in Poland. It really talks through like this is the structure of these forests, how they developed, and what does this mean for woodland conservation. So it was over 30 years ago when that book was written. I found it maybe 4 years after that, but it just to me speaks a lot to what we think about today as like guiding our stewardship, and it's just a really awesome resource. I'm glad Liz endorsed it as another forest freak. But Peterkin it's academic, but the way he writes, he includes quotes. So I guess to build on the dead upon dead, an early quote in the book I can read, and I'll confess who it is in a second. Most of us know. He starts out by saying, "No one." This is an old quote he uses. "No one has yet described for me the difference between the wild forest which once occupied our oldest townships and the tame one which I find there today. It's a difference which would be worth attending to. The European settler not only clears the land permanently to a great extent and cultivates open fields, but he tames and cultivates to a certain extent the forest itself. By his mere presence, almost he changes the nature of the trees as no other creature does. It has lost its wild, damp, and shaggy look. The countless fallen and decaying trees, I sense a theme in our quotes, are gone, and consequently that thick coat of moss which lived on them is gone too." So that's actually a quote by Thoreau that he uses in the book, but really speaks to with the book's premises, really trying to understand like what have we lost, and how do we use that understanding of the few remnant forests to try to inform that. And so it's a great book, and one that, for me was just pivotal, and like, this is what I want to do. I want to kind of learn from this, and and look at the pictures and visit these places. And so, it's dense, but Liz endorsed it too. So it's a good book.
Okay, right now I'm really loving, I've heard bird nerd, but I'm loving forest freaks.
Yes. You can sleep in too, they're just there, the trees,
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, that's great. So I haven't seen too many books other from all of you in the chat. If you have anything that you want to comment on in the books you talked about, or if you have any questions about those books, because they've obviously read them, you can type those in the chat. I'm going to share the books we're reading in the coming year for the Coverts book group, just for some more books for your list. And so let me just pull that over here so at least I can look like I'm looking at the camera. So we're going to be reading 6 books this year. We're going to be reading The Serviceberry by Robin Wall Kimmerer, Not the End of the World by Hannah Ritchie, Is a River Alive by Robert McFarlane, The Light Eaters by Zoe, I don't know how to say her last name, Schlanger, Wolverine Way by Douglas Chadwick, and Wild at Heart by Alice Outwater. So those are some other books. We'll put them on the list, and you certainly can add them to your wish list. Hopefully they're interesting. Other books on my list, like I told you, I have a really long list, is Carbon by Paul Hawken. And then there's the new one by Doug Tallamy. Get the name of it. It's over there on the table though. All right, so you shared with your favorite books. I'm going to put you on the spot. What's on your reading list?
So I have a minute to think about it. Can I ask Tony a question?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tony, I'm curious, what do you think a conversation between Kat Anderson and George Peterkin would be like? How would you imagine that sort of going?
Yeah, I think in when Natural Woodland was written, and I mean there's definitely terms like virgin, primeval. I mean, there's a lot, and there's maybe a nod here and there, the potential of indigenous, interaction with the forest, but not much at all. That I think if it was at the time of the book being written, that I would hope that Peterkin would be in a ears wide open mode to learn about maybe like what was a pretty Western perspective on those forests. And I think, to me, that's maybe why I led with that Anderson book, is that it was, certainly being able to interact and learn from friends that work, that are tribal members. I've learned a lot, but that book, I think, to me, really allowed me to dig into it in the way that we all like to dig in and learn more. And so, yeah, it opened my eyes quite a bit that I think Peterkin would probably rethink some of the ways in which he talks about natural and, what is natural. And that includes people in those areas, and including like the Pisgah, that tract down in southern, southwestern New Hampshire. There clearly was evidence, and those ridges, and there's some pretty significant archaeologic sites on the Ashuelot River right there, like old fish weirs and like carvings in the stone, literally within like a quarter mile of that old growth area that was being described as like uninhabited by people forever. And so I think, I would hope the conversation would be constructive, but really trying to think about like a broader perspective on what is natural and why are forests the way they are today. So, and he does get into stewardship, and I think that's where they might have some similar thinking, about, Anderson talks about instead of leave no trace, you should leave a beautiful trace, like really thinking about, like a positive impact, and kind of there's definitely a couple of quotes around like the oral traditions around like the gifts that, the life and the blood from the plants that are gifts, and how do we honor those gifts. And I think that would, change the stewardship model you would describe for emulating natural, once you include people in that picture. Yeah, really good question.
We used to talk about, it's sort of, I love the evolution of like our thinking and our thoughts, and we keep learning, right? And you read The Sixth Extinction, I read that and like, that wasn't very long ago that we discovered some of these things, and that always amazed me. And, and thinking about looking at forests and how we've changed the way we look at forests and forest management or forest stewardship. I remember when Coverts was first beginning, this is before my time, when Tom McAvoy was still involved in it, he had his positive impact forestry book that he would teach and share. And so it's all these different things, which is great, trying to have that stewardship thought, that stewardship model. So it's all very interesting, this evolution and this growth. All right, so did anybody come up with what's on their book list to read?
I can share one I'm in the middle of, and then one that's been recommended. I'll start with the recommended one, which is called 1 Square Inch of Silence, by Gordon Hempton. And this was a book a colleague just handed to me within the last week. We had the opportunity to have Peter Newman, who's the new dean of the Rubenstein School, speak at an all-staff meeting at A&R recently. And he just talked about sound and how sound influences people's experiences in nature. And it was a really interesting and sort of thought-provoking talk. And my colleague had said it reminded her of this book. So I'm looking forward to reading it. And then the other one I'm in the middle of is a book called The Wizard and the Prophet by Charles Mann. And it has talked about sort of two philosophies of kind of land management and humans' impacts. And one is the wizard is based on the idea that we can sort of engineer our way out of it. The first section that I finished was on fertilizer and plant genetics, and how their researchers have sort of created better versions of wheat and corn, although he calls it maize for a very specific reason, and figured out how to make pull nitrogen out of the air, and all that we can sort of engineer our way out of what would otherwise be a crisis. And then the profit side of the conversation is about trying to find some amount of balance with the natural world, where humans just don't overwhelm and consume every natural resource. And I'm sure it's that the truth lies somewhere in between. But so we've gone through the agriculture piece, and I'm now in a climate change section of the book. But it has been a really interesting read. I read it on my Kindle, so I don't actually know how long it is, but I feel like I've been reading it a long time. And I'm only about halfway through it. So just put that out there so you can be forewarned that may be a real tome if you pick it up.
That's great. Allan or Tony, you got a book that you're like chomping to read that's sitting on your to-do list, or when you get to it list?
I have one that I'm in the middle of, and I honestly can't remember the title of it. It's by I'll put it in the chat. Rodney Stotts, who was a former drug dealer, was incarcerated, and kind of became infatuated with falcons. And now he has become essentially, he's out of jail now, teaches falconry and sort of healing through birds. So I started it. He's gotten into prison now, and I want to know how it's going to turn out. But it's supposed to be a really good book. The other one I just got for my birthday on the bird theme, The Birds That Audubon Missed. So this is about the birds that Audubon never painted, and I'm kind of curious, especially with some of the controversy about the Audubon name. It's actually another Ken Kaufman book, so he's an awesome writer. So interested in reading that, and hopefully we'll get to that. I doubt I'll get to it before classes start, but maybe it'll keep me off the streets in the spring semester.
Well, we'll see if we finished it by next December.
Yeah, there you go.
And I looked up real quick. It was Bird Brother.
Oh, Bird Brother, awesome! Thank you.
Then there's a little more to it, but
yeah.
But that's by Rodney Stotts. Looks interesting. Yeah. Tony, anything on your I wish I could had time to read list?
Yeah, I don't have it in my office, but I just got a copy of Linda Mapes' book, The Trees Are Speaking. I can paste it in here. It's not about trees talking to each other. Close that book. But yeah, it's really cool book. Linda was at the Harvard Forest as a Bullard Fellow for a while, and she's also a writer for several newspapers in the Pacific Northwest. So it's a cool book that really looks at both like the Pacific Northwest and the Northeast. So and in both cases, interacting both with foresters, loggers, forest scientists, the Penobscot Nation in Maine, several tribal nations in the Pacific Northwest, and really looks at relationship with the forest, how people are really kind of listening to the forest and changing what they're doing and kind of evolving in practice. And Steve Tatko, some might know, the forester with the Appalachian Mountain Club, he's featured in there, as well as some other pretty impressive folks like Jerry Franklin, that many know the name and respect. But yeah, it's supposed to be a great book. And Linda's a great author. She wrote another book that she followed like an oak tree for an entire year, like day-to-day, like diary of like one oak tree in the forest at the Harvard Forest. So she's done some pretty cool nature writing about trees. So yeah, I'm looking forward to looking at it.
That's great. Well, that's pretty much a wrap. We're right almost at 8 o'clock. I do like to stay on time and give you all your evenings back. If there are any last thoughts from our participants, you're welcome to type those into the chat. And you guys have any last minute things to say?
Thank you for the opportunity to be part of it. This was a really enjoyable hour.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Great to hear your suggestions as well.
Yeah, I got to get up to speed in the bird books, so I'm gonna appreciate that.
You've got a library right down the hall, Tony.
Yeah.
Have you been out birding with Allan before, Tony?
We get the data that Allan collects at our research sites. We're really lucky. So yeah, no, I've been around Allan talking about birds, and it's pretty awesome to get to be in that. So
I got to go out on Lake Champlain on one of the
Yeah.
bird cruises Allan takes in the fall and see some gulls firsthand.
Yes.
Not that I could separate them, but I saw a lot of them.
now you know the book. You can.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
I can study up for next year.
Well, I want to thank you all for taking time to join us tonight and be part of our community. We really appreciate all of you in the work and the research that you do at UVM, and Julie, the work that you're doing with the state. It's really important. And, you know, our community is in support of all of you. And when you have information to share with landowners, please think of us. And we love having you come speak with us. So thank you again so much. We so appreciate it. And we wish everyone a happy holiday season. And I will be sending out the book list with the recording. It should be a few days, but you'll all have that if you didn't get a chance to write them down. Again, thank you all and have a good night.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Great. Thank you.
See you.
Thank you.